I'm supposed to start by sort of explaining what making peace is all about. And I'm excited that there's so many people listening today. And I hope that you can, I'm going to have you engage in some of the things that I do with students. So Making Peace meets one Saturday a month. Right now it's not online, but I'm thinking that it could be online. The kids come there at 8:30 in the morning. The parents drop them off. They're tired. They don't want to be there. They're usually referred by a youth aid panel or some other agency sends them to us. Occasionally a parent will say, yeah, I want my child, I'd like to take advantage of this program. But they're tired. They're doing it because they feel like they have to. So that's a challenge working with students like that right from the get-go. The parents have a separate program, and I think that's a strength of this program. The parents are meeting at the same time the kids are meeting. Their program's a little bit shorter. And then in the end, we come together and we have some communication and circle time, and we hit the highlights of what we talked about in these parallel programs. I love teaching it. I've been teaching it, I don't know how long I've been teaching. It's years and years. I just teach it a couple times a year, but I think this content is so practical for every single person, no matter what age you are. So that's kind of a synopsis of what we do, or a little bit about the program. Specifically, the curriculum is built around an acronym STAR, STARR. I have to cheat and look. It's stop, think, ask, reduce, and respond. So we teach a little piece of that throughout each of those topics throughout the morning. We teach kids about iMessages, and we do little skits with communication and a good listener versus a bad listener. And we teach these 5 strategies, these 5 conflict strategies that people use. And the kids like those because they're like sharks and teddy bears and foxes and owls, and each of them have a characteristic, and they try and figure out who they are. And then I always say, now that's great that you can figure out who you are and how you function. Go over and stand by the animal that your parents are. So that's kind of fun, because then they can realize that their parents and their kids have a different conflict style, which is a conflict in and of itself. So that's a little bit about the program. I'm just going to get right into the content now. I want you to, let me back up for one thing, because when we meet in a circle, one of the very first things I say is, you know what, I think this is the coolest thing that's happening right now in Lancaster this morning, because it truly is like community, like I'm community coming together with community, trying to help each other out and work together. If the kids leave with one little thing, then it was worth our time. If they can tweak their life and the parents can tweak their life in one little way, it was worth our time. And we see a lot of success and we see breakthroughs. Kids leave different and parents leave different than when they came. So I'm hoping that you're going to leave different because you came to this morning, or because you're listening in. One thing that we really, or I just really believe that to get a hold of your anger and really understand anger, you have to really kind of get a hold of 2 things. What are your triggers, and how do you feel when your body is when anger is coming to your body? So we focus on helping kids identify their triggers, and then we focus on how their body feels when they get angry. You can do that right now. I would encourage you just to take advantage of this time and just kind of make a list of your triggers. Like I say, what pushes your buttons, or what sets you off, or what gets you hot and bothered? What are those things? Because once you get a hold of those things, you can really avoid situations, or you can at least go into a situation knowing this is a situation where I'm going to get a little bit frustrated or possibly angry, and I want to be prepared for how I'm going to respond in that moment. Because quite frankly, when you are escalated, your brain doesn't work the same way. You can't really think clearly. So if you're ready in that way, you can either get out of the situation or be ready to face it with some good coping skills. Just an example of what I hear at Making Peace, the triggers that upset kids are if somebody has their name in their mouth, they say, that girl had my name in her mouth. So that means that a trigger for that student is they don't like people talking about them. They don't like people gossiping about them. They don't, if somebody looks at them weird, sometimes that's a trigger. So those are some kind of triggers that we hear about in the kids portion of Making Peace. One thing that I really try and help kids understand is anger is not a bad thing. Anger is, it depends what you do with your anger. People have done really great things with their anger. They've been energized to change the world with anger. Injustices like child abuse and things like that. But on the other hand, we often make poor choices in our anger. So, but it's not really anger that's the problem. I help kids try and understand that right before anger comes, there's another feeling that's usually disrespect, or it could be hurt or embarrassment. And to illustrate this, I'm going to give you an example of what that looks like. So if I work in a school, I'm a guidance counselor, and I have opportunities sometimes to go in and teach classes. At the very beginning, I made a rookie mistake. I was teaching the class, the student was misbehaving, and I was like, I called him out. And they got angry and they yelled back at me, and pretty soon I was like, ooh, what do I do now? But what happened is right before that anger came to that child, embarrassment came. So because he was embarrassed, he didn't know what to do with his embarrassment, so he got angry and yelled. Another situation is I had a student that was being reported to his sister that he was being berated over and over and over on the bus. So he got off the bus one afternoon, and his sister got on the bus and really attacked that student, physically attacked that student that was berating her brother. So, there's an example of how anger happens. But the thing that happens right before that is that sister felt disrespected, and there was a value of loyalty there. Let's see, I think those are my two big examples of that. In Making Peace, we teach this quote in our curriculum by Parker J. Palmer. It goes like this: violence is what happens when we don't know what else to do with our suffering. Violence is what happens when we don't know what else to do with our suffering. Now, kids don't get that really. So what I do to help them understand that is I say punching and yelling and gossiping and pushing and shoving. That's what happens when we don't know what to do, when someone doesn't recognize our values. Some good examples of this are if a parent really values, everyone has their own values, if a parent really values honesty and integrity, that's a high value for them, and then someone lies to them, that's a trigger for them. Another example would be some parents really value safety and security. All parents do, but some people take it to a different level. And then they have a child who doesn't really let them know their whereabouts consistently or conscientiously. That is a trigger and a contentious point for that family. On the other hand, you have a child who values, they're getting older, they want to be autonomous, they value freedom, trust, autonomy. They feel frustrated, and it's a trigger for that child to be constantly wanting for the parent to constantly be wanting to know where they're at. So everyone has different values and everyone's at different places. For myself, I value beauty and order and organization. I spend a tremendous amount of my life making things beautiful and organizing things and keeping things moving. My daughter On the other hand, her bedroom, she does not have the same values as I have. I don't know what that value is. I think it's being laid back. I think that's a value. I need to understand that value better. Now that I taught this, I'm thinking, my gosh, I need to understand her values better. Another situation I can share with you is that a lot of kids enter this program, and I see this at school too, where they get into fights because of yo mama jokes. This is not funny. These children are taken care of by their mother and protected and fed and defended and nurtured by their mother. And for someone to put down their mother in a joking way, it is not funny to that child. That value, they value family, they value loyalty, they value respect, and they will fight over that. And like I said, I see that, and it still happens today. That is not something that's, old fashioned. People still, that's a trigger for some families, for some children. Think of the movie Blind Side. How that child developed a protective value and protected his quarterback because he protected his mom so much in his life, and that's how he grew up. So I think connecting these values to anger, I think that's really important. I'd like to hear from the audience. We want to make this a time of sharing. And Chris, I'm not sure, you might have to use the chat note. I have no idea how many people are joining in today. But I would like to hear, I asked you to write down your triggers. Think about, when you think about a particular conflict that you've experienced, what is one value that you can think about that you are feeling?
So Krista's going to share maybe some of those, and if someone particularly wants to share their story, they can certainly unmute it, and we would love to hear it. But Krista, if you've got some general comments there that people might have shared already, then we would certainly love to hear from some of those.
Yeah, I don't have people haven't written in yet, but I would love for some people to start. Putting in there, what are those values that you notice for yourself? What are your triggers? And I'll just kind of highlight them as they come in, so that you're not having to focus on reading and listening all at the same time. But there is a note, unappreciated or disrespected. That's what one person has written in. What else are people noticing for themselves, either as a base value that that gets you fired up, or what is the thing that really gets you? And you may have a specific example of something that has happened within your home with your family, or it may just be a general comment. We are gonna wait for a few
I'd love
more.
to hear from the kids. It sounds like there's some students watching this. Think about this. What came right before anger? What value were you feeling before anger came to your body?
There's one suggestion there that not listening to every word is a trigger. Being underestimated is another trigger. When someone takes advantage of someone else, being dismissed, any negative comments being said. It's some of these are really being unappreciated and disrespected. I know for me growing up, and as you shared upon that, my parents and I would butt heads on that one, on the issue of checking in, but also being independent was a huge one that my parents and I would butt heads on. And as people think, let me ask you this, and this might come up a little later, how do you recommend people take time after, say, episodes of anger to come to that understanding of what their value was beforehand? Is there some steps that people can take if they've just got themselves angry to potentially stop and maybe examine some of those feelings?
Yeah, I was going to hit on that later.
Pause. We won't steal the thunder then.
But really, stepping away is so important. I was going to share when I work in a school, and when I get called into a room to get a student who is escalated, we want to isolate that student as quickly as possible. Take that student out, keep them safe from themselves, keep them safe from other people. So you need to give space when those feelings are all over the place. I think we've all said things that we regret. when we've been escalated. But escalation techniques are really important. You isolate them and you let them alone. It's not a time for conversations. It's not a time to correct. It's not a time to instruct. It's a time for that child or adult or a student to come to get their heart rate back to normal. And then I think Terry has some ideas too, but we'll talk about that in a teeny bit, maybe
Yeah,
more.
someone said being lied to, when others pass along the blame for their own mistakes, using excuses. So there's a broad range of values that can bubble up our anger. And I like what you said there, Lynette, that anger is not necessarily a bad emotion. And I think maybe that's one of the mistakes we make, thinking that anger is a bad emotion.
Right.
Yeah, there's that last comment, that a theme that is coming up in this is that somehow we're not being valued, that a piece of us or our individuality is not being valued. So it's interesting to hear that kind of fits in. I'm hearing from what Lynette was saying of examples from the youth as well. So these are things that span from our youth years into our adult years. And I'm excited to hear how you're going to bring us forward with that, Lynette, now that we've identified some of those things.
Yeah,
Let me just
want to add something.
go ahead, Terry.
The times when I get the most angry in my life now at this age is when I'm driving, and I don't have road rage, but close to it, because I have a value that courtesy is something that we should do one another, and that's basically valuing other human beings. And so when someone cuts me off or does something that I think wasn't very nice, that's a trigger for me, but they're basically not valuing me as a person. And it's just interesting to understand where that anger comes from.
And I would just share, ask both of you for your input in this current environment we face, for both children and teenagers and even parents. Would you say that security, safety, that not fear is a big value system that we might be having to adjust to in this new world?
Oh, sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think what you said, Terry, about not feeling respected, obviously other people do not value courtesy the way you do.
Right.
You know, and I think we're all different. And I think, and maybe I think this is your part of the program, how we have to stop and listen to the people we're conflicted with and figure out and respect their values. That's really what it comes down to, respecting someone's values. What's important to them? Kids really want respect. Adults want respect, but respect looks differently to every person. So I'm going to keep going here. So we did the triggers. Now the next very most important thing is, how does anger feel when it comes to your body? Because if you know the triggers and you can say, ooh, I'm getting hot, I'm getting like my neck is starting to get red, or my ears are starting to get red, or my palms are starting to sweat, or I'm starting to make fists with I'm starting to clench my hands into fists. You know that anger is just about there, right? So if you can get out with those two things, you have a better chance of making wise decisions in your anger. So we teach kids in Making Peace about the flight and flight response. And a lot of times they know about that from school. So that's helpful. But the thing that really brings it home to help them understand it is, I'm like, think of a cat. A cat who is angry is their tail is puffed out because they want to look larger than what they are and more scarier. Their teeth are showing, they're hissing, they have claws. They have, I don't want to miss anything. They're all puffed out. Their back is arched, and I think that's ready. They're ready to launch, and their eyes could kill. Laser, you know. So that's a cat when it's escalated. So then I'm like, okay, I want to know, you think about your own body, because everyone is different. Everyone's different. You make a list, and you guys can do this right now. Make a list of how your body acts when anger starts to come to it. So that's one of the things we have them do, and that's a really good thing for parents to do with kids, so that they know, oh, I see, you know, that they're starting to grind their jaw or something like that, and I know that anger's coming. Now's not a good time to have a conversation. Let's separate for a little bit. I can tell, this isn't a good moment to work out a conflict. So that's important. So they get that with the cat, and they can make good lists of how their body is changing. So up to this point, I talked mostly about how we're going up a mountain. Anger, sometimes we call it anger mountain. I think there was a picture there of a mountain. That's why, because you kind of go up the mountain, and then at the top, it's like a volcano sometimes where it explodes. But I want to talk just for a moment about coming down the other side. These are called cool down strategies. And in our STAR acronym, it's reduce before we respond. With everyone being close, we know that there's a lot going on in home. Social distancing has made home environment tight. And I have a friend who has a son-in-law that's a police officer, and she just told me yesterday that most of the calls that they're getting are for domestic violence. So we know that this conversation today is really relevant, that we can put these things right into practice today. You asked earlier what you can do for a cool down. That's basically what you were asking. I say step away from the situation, bite your tongue, be patient, and also make sure everyone has enough alone time, separation time, or just alone time. I think that's really important. That's kind of a proactive thing, and I don't want to step on what Terry's going to say, but before I hand off to Terry, I would love to hear what some of you do to cool down. Maybe you run, maybe you listen to music, or exercise, get on the exercise equipment, or you journal. I would love to hear from the audience some of the strategies that they use to cool down. Wait, let me read the question here.
Let me put it up. There you go.
Yeah. What is one way that you've learned to cool down or avoid conflicts helpfully? You can chat, send a chat in. This helps us feel more connected in a time where we're not feeling so connected.
Somebody said take a drive, sing and hum, go to a separate room.
I don't know how to do that.
Jazz music.
How do you chat?
Krista, if it's it should be in the right-hand side of your screen. There should be a small chat functionality box. Krista can explain a little bit more for us.
So two things. If you are on a laptop, if you move your mouse over top of any part of the screen, there should be a chat button at the bottom. That's like a little bubble, a little chat bubble. If you're on a cell phone or some other device, you can go into participants. That should be one of your options at the bottom of the screen, participants. And then within that, there's a chat box that you can type into from there.
Well, my iPad doesn't have any of the above, so.
Oh, shoot.
Well,
I just have anything that says participants.
Well, seeing you're on, go ahead and share your thoughts anyway.
Yeah,
we can hear you.
What helps you cool down?
Well, I was just going to say, to start with, I'm a school nurse, and working with teenagers, we do just what you said. Excuse me, when they come in, they've been in a fight, we isolate them into different rooms so they can cool down, and then different people talk to them, either the principal, myself, and you it's amazing, because what we do as a nurse, I will take their blood pressure and their pulse and be able to show them the difference as they breathe down and relax. And so, I say this anger has been hurting you too. So, but anyhow, that's just what I wanted to throw out there. But what I do is exercise. Oh my gosh, for my stress, with this weather, it's been nice to just get out and walk, but I also have equipment in my house. So when I can't get to the gym, exercise and sweating, oh my gosh, it's the best thing.
We have a lot of participants from the Boys and Girls Club of Lancaster, and I know many of you work with some kids who just need some of these skills particularly. What are some of the tools that maybe someone wants to share from that team? What are some of the tools that you encourage your young men and women, young girls and guys to do to handle their anger in a positive way?
Well, while people are having a chance to write in, there's a couple other things. whoever was just speaking mentioned the breathing and watching blood pressure, but breathing deeply was also mentioned in the chat, as well as waiting till you have a space to process out loud with someone that you trust. Or even there was another one, using energy to help someone else so that it takes the focus off the anger. Those are all great.
I love this one. Write all emotions out on paper, no filter.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Then rip it up and throw it away. I love that one.
Yeah.
About 10 years ago, I was encouraged to write a letter to my parents, my dad, about some stuff that was holding me back, and just to write, like, it ended up being a 6 or 7 page letter, and you know, I burned it. Never said it, but it was incredibly therapeutic. And now we can't record this, so sorry about that. No, I'm kidding. But drawing to redirect is a great thing. Breathe deeply. Lynette, Terry, tell me this. Often we maybe the younger generation or my generation was told that there was this biblical phrase that never let the sun go down in your anger. And for some homes they might have been told to always deal with their anger, and no matter what time it is, you know, always get that anger out till the end of the day. Not beneficial, right? I'm hearing you say walking away from a situation and taking a breather can be a lot more beneficial in dealing with anger.
Terry, do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, I think that was a general good idea. If you go to bed angry, you probably won't sleep well. It wrecks your day the next day. But you don't want it to be like a rule that, okay, I'm going to tell you what I feel about you so that I can go to bed not angry. It's not that. So, I mean, you want to think about both people, what works best, when is a timely situation to deal with what's going on.
From what I was hearing, just to add on to that, I think there's this, what are my values, as well as what do I need to cool down? And so knowing those things and knowing that for the other person as well will be a lot of what dictates then, you know, maybe it is in the same day, but you need like to know the strategies around when within the day to do that, and or if someone does need longer to cool down, being able to identify and articulate and respect then what those personal styles are.
And before we transition, there's just one really interesting comment here. Shelf my feelings until we can discuss with a safe friend, or in this case, the husband. And I think that's a big thing in this very climate, for kids and adults to have a safe person to unleash on. And I don't unleash in a negative way, but just, you know, let things out. Someone said offer a quiet space. There are stress balls and writing materials in that space. Yeah, whatever it may be. I love that idea of having a safe friend that you can talk to, or just rattle off. I'm a verbal processor, so I like that one. So great ideas there. And if you have any questions, then obviously keep posting them there, and time willing, we'll have an opportunity for questions when we come to the end. So we'll pass back to you, ladies. Thank you.
Well, that pretty much is where I'm going to hand off to Terry. She has some great strategies for families. I always think of things in terms of, you know, like defense and offense. There's some things that you do when you're in the situation, but then there's some things that you can do proactively that might avoid conflicts, or might help people understand each other's values more, and that they'll have different kind of relationships that will minimize the number of conflicts they have. So Terry, I'm going to hand off to you.
Okay, so in Making Peace, the one thing I stress with parents is communication skills. And so that's, again, something that I'm going to talk about right now, especially when people are all cooped up in one home together. You need to know each individual and their communication skills. And everybody's different. You know, just because you're in the same family doesn't mean you all think alike. So I have a little practice here that can be fun and be helpful to start understanding each other better in this time. And I'm going to base my idea on a spiritual practice that's called the Examine, which is a solemn name for reflecting on your day. So it's done at the end of the day, perhaps after supper or before bedtime. And the idea is to have everyone in the home sit in a circle and have each person answer 2 simple questions. and there are not to be any interruptions or judgments when a person is talking. And if you need to use a talking piece, by that I mean the person who's talking is holding the piece in their hand and no one else gets to talk while they're holding it, that would be helpful. But you want to make it fun and special. You could even do a thing like light a candle and say, now we're going to do this time together. And here are the two questions. One, what was the most life-giving part of my day? Number two, what was the most life-thwarting part of my day? Or, to make it simpler, what was I most grateful for today? Or what was I least grateful for today? Or even simpler, what was the best part of my day? What was the worst part of my day? And even little children can participate in this, and they will actually love it, because they can say, the happiest part of my day today was when I got an extra piece of cake. Okay, you cannot laugh at them. Well, you can laugh, but you cannot say, no, it wasn't. The happiest part of your day was this. You can't tell them. It's a time for you to listen to each other without judging and without commenting. And if you've never done this before, it might take a while to get the practice going. Like, try it for night after night after night. The children will remember because they like to do this. And teenagers, maybe not so much. And they might even be like, the worst part of my day is doing this. That's okay. Accept it and let it go. I mean, and then you might, after a while, start picking up a pattern with a child, or start understanding another person in your family a little bit more than you thought you did. Sometimes we assume we know what someone else is going to say, and then they surprise us by something completely different. And I think it's a real way of giving everybody a voice, helping people identify their feelings, and learn how to listen to one another. And it can be just a fun thing to try, and I would love to know if it works for people, or if they've tried something like this, or any ideas on this idea.
So Terry, I'm going to jump in here because it's actually something that my family does every night with a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 20-month-year-old. And we did not plan this. We did not plan this, people out there in Advoz land. This was, so we actually call it, rather amusingly, we call it the yay for today and the boo woo woo for today.
Good.
It works really well. And then actually the kids want to take turns in being the voice of our 20-month-year-old. And so they each share what they think was the yay and the boo woo woo for our 20-month-old daughter. But it works great. Now we did have to implement, like, you couldn't say dinner all the time because they would always say dinner. But we would always say, what else apart from the food was your yay? And it was really, it's really, really fun. We changed the name. We used to do it Roses and Thorns was what we used to call it. But I don't think they understood it so much. So we started to call it yay for today and the boo woo woo for today, and everybody shares. And then whoever was the last person to share can throw it to the next person while we're eating. And it's really fun. It's really fun because some people shared they couldn't go outside, or they couldn't go outside for as much as they wanted to, or Lego broke. But it's one of the favorite parts of our day. So yeah,
Cool.
works really well.
I think the parents have to be behind this. Both the caregivers have to be behind this and vulnerable as well for it to work. So it can be a really, really cool thing.
Other people do something similar to that?
Does anyone else
school.
have something similar that they do?
We do it at school for our circle time. They call it happy crappy. Same thing.
These are the kinds of things that you have to form and adjust to your situation.
Yeah.
Make it yours.
I love that.
Hey, Terry, could that be done at a meal? Like
Oh, yeah.
dinner?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. It gives you something to talk about. I think it would be excellent. or right after the meal is over, before you all leave and go in your separate ways.
Does
I know
it
some
lead, does it
people
lead
do it
to
with-
other conversation?
Pardon me?
Does it lead to other conversation?
Well, it can, yeah,
Mhm.
sure. I mean, after you've all shared, you can always ask somebody, so why did that make you sad?
Mhm.
Or what were you expecting instead? I mean, it's
Mm.
definitely leads to more conversation. That was my practical thing. That was all I had to bring today. Oh, I had one more idea. I had one more idea. Chris, I had mentioned this to you, and this is for communication strategies for parents who are not used to being together all day long, and if you're both working from home and you start to get on each other's nerves. This was from a New York Times article, and someone else brought it to my attention, of creating a phantom coworker who is the one that you blame for the things that don't get done. So you can name this person and say, oh, I can't believe that Sally left all those dishes in the sink again. Or whatever. And it takes some of the pressure off. You can say that you're kind of frustrated, and you don't always have to be saying, husband, I feel frustrated because you're not doing the dishes. It can make it lighter, but you're still getting your idea across. I think it's funny.
Mhm.
When we used to go traveling, Bertha was the name of the GPS. So that whenever we had directional arguments, it was never the husband or the wife. It was always Bertha the GPS. Apologies if anyone has any relatives named Bertha. We didn't mean it. So let me just kind of ask this. There's a question up there that we're sharing. What communication strategies or practices are working for you? And it may just be, I'd love to hear some feedback. What are communication strategies are working for you in this new time? What strategies are working for you in your family? What communication strategies are working for you in your jobs? And as you think about that, are there any particular questions as we head to kind of the end of the structured time? Are there any particular questions for Terry and Lynette, either from the youth side or from the parent side, that anyone would like answered? So as you're thinking about that, you can share those questions in there. I will ask you, Terry and Lynette, maybe to share from the parent side and the youth side. What would be, obviously we would start with the youth side and the child side. What would one piece of advice that you would give to adults as we seek to understand our children and understand our youth during this particular time? Like, what would be a piece of advice that you would give the grown-ups who have young people in their worlds and in their homes during this new reality that we're all facing?
So if you want to understand youth at this time or any time, I think resist the temptation to lecture and just turn off your voice and listen more. Learn to ask questions and listen and try to be non-judgmental. I think that's the key. And listen, this is what I used to do with my kids when they were younger. Sometimes I would pretend that they weren't my children and that they were somebody else's children. Because sometimes you're more polite to other people's children. And if I could sort of distance myself and change that click that a little differently and listen, I might have more compassion when it's a tension point. I think young people just tune you out when you start into that lecture mode.
I think I would say, and this isn't unique to this time frame, is you really have to be ready to listen when they're ready to talk, whether it's the playoffs of the NHL or right when you're you just got the energy to paint a room and they come around. It does seem like they want to talk at inopportune times. So like, put stuff down and listen, because it's on their terms kind of when they come to you and want to talk. The second thing that I really have come to understand in a whole new way in the past couple years I worked at the high school and now I work at the middle school, is there are developmental things going on in especially between 10, well, no, really all through a child's life. Developmentally, they're changing all the time. And it's really important to understand where they're at developmentally. Like students I work with, they're learning to be autonomous, and you want them to be autonomous. They're learning to think for themselves. They have gone from seeing and understanding concrete things over to being able to think abstractly. That's why we teach pre-algebra at the middle level, because they don't think abstractly in a realistic way until that. So because they're starting to be able to think, at some point in their life, they went from not being able to talk to themselves to being able to have whole conversations with themselves in their head. I don't know when that happens, but all that self-talk and all those things can bring about arguments. Like if a child all of a sudden comes up with this idea and it doesn't make sense, but they stand on it because they can and because they want to and because developmentally that's where they're at. But if a parent doesn't understand that's just part of growing up and that's where they're at right now, that could cause a lot of conflicts. You might be really frustrated if you don't really get your head around what's happening developmentally, socially, emotionally, cognitively, in all the different areas of growth, especially at this middle level where they have one foot in their childhood. One day they'll have a temper tantrum like a 2-year-old, and the next day you're like, wow, I think we could give them the keys to the car. I mean, they're just in between and back and forth, and it's no wonder there's a lot of conflicts with this age because they're changing so much.
If I could just jump in here too and say, and it's just sort of speaking to the question of what's working, and one of the resources we're going to flag is Marshall Rosenberg, who founded a system called Nonviolent Communication. And something that has really worked for me, not just worked in terms of like communicated work, but also tells me when I'm not communicating well, is if I listen to my question and if my voice is raised when I ask the question. So for example, if I say, why didn't you take out the trash? And rather than why didn't you take out the trash? Just that difference will trigger something different in my kids. And I've noticed that over and over again. And I've noticed just this weekend that probably like 60% of my questions were, I would say, in the heightened level, like not helpful. And so it helps me kind of self-monitor, like, oh yeah, I'm, part of my motivation for some of my communication is actually correcting rather than actual questioning or curiosity or motivating my kids. So it does really help to think about, even if your question is a question, we're always told questions should go up at the end, but if a question goes down, an example would be like, so what do you think we were talking about last night? And sort of see how my voice drops down. What do you think we were talking about last night? Is the difference between those two things is the difference between feeling accused and feeling genuine curiosity from the parent. So that's just a little tip thing that I've learned that I'm still learning. So just to pass that on. And if anyone else has any other, I think we have 6 or 7 minutes, any other thoughts there? We probably have enough people, or few enough people, that if somebody wants to step in with an example to what's working, we have another couple minutes for that.
There is meant to be an awkward pause. The technology didn't stop working.
My daughter gave me some advice today. She goes, Mom, if you get really stuck, just freeze. No one will know that it's not a technology problem. I thought that was pretty good.
As you think, I will share some pieces. They are saying now that 3-year-olds are called three-nagers. And I think what's particularly just interesting is just remembering some takeaways here, that we all have stories, we all have feelings. Nobody just wakes up in the morning and is angry straight away. There are a plethora of feelings that get us to anger. And I think that's if I've been hearing what Lynette and Terry have both been saying, that there are some challenges there with our own anger, with the anger of the kids that we serve, with the kids that we interact with. And if you just take a moment to ask yourself, how do you feel in the midst of this? How do the kids in the world, how do the people at home, how do the people with extra burdens feel? And so there are some resources up there on the screen that the team has provided. And I do know that we are thinking particularly about what it would look like, and this is your opportunity to make it happen. If you've thoroughly enjoyed this session, then and if you would like to see the Making Peace sessions delivered virtually, it might be a little bit difficult because there's a lot more interaction pieces there. Then certainly flood us with emails at director@advoz.org, and if we get enough emails, I can send them off to these two ladies and convince them to do the whole thing virtually. Just some comments there that people have said. I try to reframe my questions. It doesn't matter if it's with my family, my friends, or my coworkers. I use the who, what, when, where, why, and how. I will always use why questions for last. Why tends to trigger defense mechanisms. Making comments or asking questions from a judge or a learner perspective makes a big difference on how you communicate with other people. I love that one. Thank you, Alan, for that one. The learner question. Why? Like, if you've ever sat next to a kid who all they ever ask is why? 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 Not a why. Why? So there's a big difference between the angry dad why and the 3-year-old why. There's some great insights there. So there's some fabulous resources there. Terry and Lynette, thank you not just for today, but for all the time that you and many other of the Making Peace team put into this. Earl Dean and others who aren't joining us today. But we really do appreciate the time and the effort you've put in. And I was saying to Lynette, you have children who are still alive, so that's a success right there. That as a parent with 6-year-olds and 3-year-olds, I'm sometimes wondering how we get to tomorrow. No kidding, that's a joke. I didn't really say that. No. So thank you so much, Terry. Thank you, Lynette. We appreciate the time. As I said before, we would love to get some feedback. The great news about this session is that the slides will be available. They will be being emailed out to you, as well as a way that you can re-listen to this session. So if there are some pieces that you didn't necessarily get today, then the slides will be available, and also the session will be available at a later point. So thank you very much for your support of Advoz. There's that quote there right at the end. I thought we would share that one again. It said, "Violence is what happens when we don't know what else to do with our suffering," by Parker J. Palmer. And I think that's a fantastic quote. And one of my favorite books as we finish up is actually To Kill a Mockingbird, where Atticus Finch makes the quote in there, "You never understand a man until you climb into moccasins and walk a mile. And you never understand a child until you climb into their shoes and walk a mile." Many of the gang here that joins us from the Boys and Girls Club of Lancaster, you guys have experienced some things in your work, in your world, that kids just shouldn't really have to experience. So thank you to each of you from the Boys and Girls Club who are here today joining us. We tip our proverbial hats off to the work that you do, and we're thankful for your partnership in the work that we are doing here at Advoz. So just a couple of things if you want to know. Advoz is still very much open for business, for continuing to work with serving clients in the remote world. We're doing some mediation, some work in the restorative justice piece with obviously some kids in juvenile probation as well. And for those of you who might be interested, the save the date that the Advoz Awareness Dinner is now on Thursday, September the 10th this year. And hopefully we're out having dinner with other people in September. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Thanks so much for joining us. Advoz.org, advoz.org is our website, or facebook.com /Advoz Lancaster is where you can get more information about who we are and what we do. And as I said, if you would love to see Terry and Lynette delivering some more amazing content, but in much longer ways, then you can email us at director@advoz.org, director@advoz.org, and we will put our heads together and figure out how to deliver that content. So to each of you, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your time. Terry and Lynette, once again, thank you so much for the work that you have put together, and it was a joy spending time with you all. Please stay happy, stay safe. Our prayers continue to be with all of you and your loved ones, and we will survive. We will push through this. So thanks all for spending your afternoon with Advoz, and you all have a great day.
Peace out.
Thanks, Lynette. Thanks, Terry.